The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Democrats are making some major mistakes right now, really just completely unforced errors. And I want to dig into this a little bit. This, as I mentioned earlier this week, we should really be in the golden era of resurgence for Democrats. And it is instead just bumbling foolishness and already telegraphing the same mistakes for 2020 that we saw Democrats make in 2018. So to set the stage for you, we had the DNC disaster of 2016, right? Absolute and total train wreck, interfering in the primary, resignations, really bad for Democrats, Inc., or what I like to call corporate Democrats. And then I told you last week that there are Democratic donors that are reportedly excited about California Senator Kamala Harris. And they're starting to give her money for the 2020 presidential race. And I said, you know, no offense. She seems smart, seems like a possibly interesting candidate. But we've got the midterms coming up here, right? And anytime I hear that Democratic donors are excited about someone 3 years out, I start to get worried, since that's exactly what got us into this mess in the first place in 2016. Cut to Monday. Democrats announced a new slogan called A Better Deal. I thought it was a disastrous slogan. A better deal could be sort of pushing back against Trump, who talks about how he will make the best deals, but it felt vacuous and it already sort of conceded the concept of deals to Donald Trump. Others said, you know, David, it might be a reference to FDR's New Deal, but yet again, a better deal. Better isn't even necessarily good. It could be better but still bad, right? So it's a totally weak slogan. And the substance is also really weak. And again, just to catch you up on where we were on Monday, this new better deal from Democrats is going to target job training programs, which Donald Trump has talked about. And it's not exactly what's going to get people super excited about voting for you. Democrats want to renegotiate trade deals, which plays right into what Donald Trump has been talking about. And it gets you into the weeds of how will we renegotiate trade deals versus how will they renegotiate trade deals. Democrats putting out, as part of this better deal, more specific spending plans for infrastructure, which also infrastructure is all well and good and with peace and love. But Trump has been talking about infrastructure deals, of course, in a totally cronyistic vulture capitalist way. But it again gets Dems into the weeds, having to be like, well, our infrastructure spending plan is better than Trump's infrastructure spending plan. So big win, really, for anybody who believes in Trump's worldview, because Democrats with this better deal essentially said, hey, we're basically conceding that Trump is talking about all the right issues, but we're going to explain to you how our plans will actually be better than Donald Trump's plans. So this is where we were up until Monday. Now it's been reported that Senator Harris, Kamala Harris, just did a second tour through the Hamptons of New York to meet with so-called influential Democratic donors. I'll remind you that earlier this month, she met with Liz Robbins, who's a top Hillary Clinton bundler of donations. She was back in the Hamptons this weekend to meet more top Clinton donors. One anonymous Democratic donor said to The Hill that Harris is, quote, absolutely going to run for president in 2020. Another source said to Page Six that, quote, she's on overdrive. It's not just about the money. That's the easy part for her. She wants to meet the influential. She's reportedly already hired multiple former Clinton staffers, and she's also seemingly trying to circumvent what could be a Bernie Sanders-style challenger popping up in 2020. She reportedly paid $400,000 to a company called Revolution Messaging, which is the same firm that built Bernie Sanders' digital and branding strategy while he was basically experiencing a media blackout back in 2015. And once again, it's this centrist, moderate, non-starter ideology. The Guardian, Pat, put out an op-ed a couple days ago saying that Harris has a great centrist platform. No, no, no. Didn't we learn from 2016? And then The Hill published an op-ed by a Democratic consultant and lobbyist saying Clinton lost in 2012 because she was moderate and conservative voters supported Barack Obama more. Okay, the problem in 2016 was partially that Hillary Clinton was to the right of Barack Obama, more centrist, and in part lots of other problems as well. They're going in the wrong direction here. I mean, it's 2017 and the Democratic Party is already setting themselves up to lose the next presidential election.
You know, I think because Trump is so scandal-ridden and because the Republicans in Congress are so ineffectual, it gives this idea that maybe you can just stay the course, that you don't have to go on the offense. But we've learned from 2016 that that's not the case because Hillary Clinton primarily ran an anti-Trump campaign.
Correct.
She didn't promote any ideas of economic populism that poll well for broader Americans that can really get you to the White House or just to win majorities in Congress. That's the path that we have to take.
The center approach basically means compromise right now, right? Center is, for example, when Barack Obama starts negotiating Obamacare with maybe a public option might be nice, and we get nothing except tens of millions of new customers for private for-profit insurance companies. And I always like to say this, Obamacare did some good things. I've praised it for the good things it did, and I've criticized it for the bad things that it did. This will get us, I mean, maybe I'm joking here, President Ted Nugent or something equivalent, maybe President Kid Rock, who's running for something up in Michigan, I believe right now. This is the type of thing that will get Trump reelected or even worse. And I'm not saying I'm against Kamala Harris, right? I mean, I'm not necessarily against her, but to anoint her now with this idea of Democratic establishment donors and the DNC and Democrats, Inc., saying, hey, here's who we're going to go with around this centrist ideology. We're starting to go about 2020 the exact same way that we went about 2016. We're seeing the same mistakes that we saw in 2016. And by the way, midterms, 2018. Why are we talking about 2020 right now?
Right. It could be hard to win a battle of personalities against Donald Trump especially. And I think that's why, for the meantime, we should just focus on specific policy proposals, make a Venn diagram of the issues that are most important to the American people and those that people will vote on. So, for example, a broader economic populist message of things like raising the minimum wage, for example, maybe reforming trade deals. All of these things will get people to the polls.
And you really have to think about what issues are non-starters. And this is difficult, right? I mean, we looked at that Gallup most important problem poll where they ask Americans, what's the most serious or pressing issue? And we saw generally the biggest issue is distrust and disapproval of our elected officials. Just people don't really trust our elected officials. That's a big matzo ball hanging out there that you've got to deal with in some way. Healthcare was at the absolute top of that list, and I've been saying it for months now. Democrats need to just say, we're for Medicare for all. We've got a bill. It's H.R. 676. It doesn't matter that it won't pass with a Republican House, Senate, and White House, but say that it's what you're for. This whole thing of, well, Obamacare has some issues which we should fix, but we never actually will, but we don't want to repeal it, and the Republican replacement, blah, 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 blah. We're for health care for everybody. Here's how we pay for it. It is our moral and patriotic duty. We will be the best country when it comes to tech and engineering and the environment and whatever if people don't have to worry about, am I going to lose my health care if I change jobs? Right? You've got to do that. And then you have to consider what issues sort of show up as important, but may not be as important of a voting issue. So immigration is one that is often debated. You could say, well, no, people do vote on immigration policy because Donald Trump talked about banning Muslims and people loved it and he won. At the same time, though, you have to think about, will a more reasonable immigration position from Democrats actually get people out and voting? If not, maybe you don't make it a huge part of your platform.
When you talk about what issues are most important to Americans right now, you'd may be surprised to learn that Russia doesn't rank very high on that list. And while that is important, I think because it goes to, the integrity of our electoral system, whether or not we have an illegitimate president, as people often say.
Of course.
Maybe not mention it on the campaign trail as much.
Yeah. And as I've said before, if Russia is something big and it pulls Trump down, Trump will be gone. You can't run against Trump. If Russia evaporates and is nothing, you still need something else to run against Trump or Republicans in 2018 and in 2020. And what I can assure you is this, again, idea of let's run in the middle. This is a recipe for disaster, and Democrats are already failing on this. Okay, I've got something very exciting to tell you about. So back in January, we did a fundraiser for the David Pakman Show, and the idea was we want to do some studio upgrades, which we did. We want to do a new position called the Progressive Engagement Coordinator. We had a long list of stuff that we wanted to do. That campaign finished without raising all of the money that we wanted, so we had to start picking and choosing what to do. And the entire plan was totally upended by the YouTube advertiser boycott, also known as Adpocalypse, which has been going on since it's sort of like day zero, March 31st of 2017. But something good still came from that fundraiser that we did in January, in addition to the studio upgrades and some staffing increases that we've been able to make, which is that Joshua Jarvis, a longtime supporter of the show, selected as his perk in this fundraiser 10 free memberships to give away. Now, the idea, Pat, was whoever selects that can give away those 10 memberships to their friends or family or whoever they want. But Joshua Jarvis, who's a really good guy, clearly, has redonated those 10 memberships back to us to give away. And what I've done is I have subdivided 10 free memberships into 20 half-price memberships. So effectively, Pat's taking out his protractor to figure out exactly where we are on this. We now have a contribution from Joshua Jarvis, which is going to allow 20 people to get memberships at half price. Joshua has already paid for half of your membership, right? So your $60 membership that you might have been thinking about getting, half of it's already been paid for. If you want a half-price membership and you can lock in that half-price rate for as long as you want to keep it, get in touch with me through our website contact form, okay? You go to davidpakman.com, you go to the contact page, and you just say, I would like one of Joshua's half-price memberships. Joshua has paid for half. I will send you a coupon code, which will allow you to sign up for only $30 instead of $60 for the year. And of course, this gets you the bonus show, the world famous bonus show. It's an extra show that we do every day. It gets you the commercial-free audio feed of the show. It gets you the commercial-free video feed of the show. It's tremendous. And it's first come, first served. Pat is not allowed to participate. Pat's family members are not allowed to participate.
Well, I was going to say that my sister needs a membership. My uncle may need 2. Yeah, my cat 1. I was just going to take all 20 of them.
I spoke to your uncle this morning. Believe me, we're working something else out with him. He's not getting any of these half-price memberships. Not open to show family. Friends, I guess. I mean, we've made a lot of friends through the show, so it's open to friends, but not family. Get in touch. I will write back to the first 20 people who say, I want one of those half-price memberships with the coupon code. Thanks to Joshua Jarvis. You can send me your thoughts about this or about Democrats Inc. or about anything else we talk about today on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at dpakman. Follow me there. Closing in on 100,000 Twitter followers. A lot of action there. You can also follow the show on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Hugh Shipman. Hugh, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. 3 ways to support our work. Number 1, do what Hugh did. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership for a great David Pakman Show membership. Number 2, go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show. You can pledge as little as $1 a month. Every dollar helps. And if you ever shop on Amazon.com, the 3rd way you can support the show is by going to davidpakman.com/Amazon before you shop, and thus everything you buy will send us a little kickback. Let's get into Hatriot Mail. We've got a very special Hatriot Mail this week. But first, what is Hatriot Mail anyway?
We're so alt-right, it's wrong. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom. Okay,
so as you probably know, the voice you hear during Hatriot Mail is not the actual voice of the Hatriot, but it is a professional deep voice movie announcer guy who volunteers to do the Hatriot Mail voiceovers. We are not identifying him at his request. And he felt that this week's Hatriot Mail really lent itself towards a slightly different accent in its interpretation. And that is why this is a very, very special Hatriot Mail this week. Take a listen to this. I think you'll like it.
I love how much of a Jew you are. You lie about Trump. You're an asshole, you jerk. You're a far leftist who hates Trump. Trump's better than the northern terrorist Abraham Lincoln and socialist communist cuck FDR. He brought down debt by $10 billion, you dick, in the first month. The liberal media is purposely trying to discard Trump just to gain power. Just please watch Project Veritas, you lefty. Putin and Trump is better than your butt buddies Obama and Merkel, who endlessly promote multiculturalism, or in scientific talk, white genocide promoted by godless communist kikes.
Wow. It feels so natural to hear, and this is no disrespect to my Southern friends. We have so many friends and viewers of the show from the South, but it feels so natural to hear Hatriot Mail, this particular one, interpreted with that accent.
Yes, this voice actor is very, very talented.
Yeah.
Not only for the accent, but also the way he was able to pronounce multiculturalism.
Well, that's how it was spelled. Yeah, I mean,
amazing.
it's amazing to figure out how these things should be pronounced. Turn Hatriot Mail into something good for the show. You can use the coupon code Hatriot40 and get a 40% discount off of membership at davidpakman.com/membership. That is spelled HATRIOT40, all lowercase, no spaces. Let's talk about healthcare. Really weird thing. Yesterday, we heard there would be a vote in the Senate about Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act repeal or the American Health Care Act, but we didn't know what was going to be voted on. Tons of reports yesterday in the afternoon saying, hey, Republicans have moved ahead on repealing Obamacare. Not exactly true. Republicans, with Vice President Mike Pence as the tie-breaking vote in the Senate, voted to start debating a bill which includes a possible Obamacare repeal. John McCain, who was recently diagnosed with brain cancer, showed up to a standing ovation, cast his vote in favor of starting debate on an Obamacare repeal, then spoke and said, as it stands right now, I wouldn't actually vote for the bills that have been proposed, but I do believe that we should start debate on this. The good news so far is what? Well, Republicans still lack 50 votes on any particular major policy plan, and they lack 60 votes on the parts of Obamacare that require 60 votes in order to repeal. Democrats and Republicans immediately moved on from this vote and went on to vote on one particular amendment, and that already failed, 57-43 in favor. But again, that was one that needed 60 votes in favor in order to pass. Here's what we can expect, and some of this is happening right now, Pat, so by the time people watch the show, either later tonight on Free Speech TV or by the time you go to the gym and get on the treadmill, like many of you do, and start listening to the episode, some of these amendments may already have been voted on, but here's some of what's going to be happening. One, the Better Care Reconciliation Act. This is one of the primary Republican legislations that would get rid of a lot of the Obamacare policies, including a penalty for people who don't have health insurance. It would cut subsidies. It would put in a different type of tax credit. This one would be a total disaster, just wouldn't work. It's already been scored. And the Medicaid expansion would also be phased out as part of this amendment. Total and utter train wreck. There's the Cruz Amendment. This is a Ted Cruz amendment, which would basically allow insurance companies to totally ignore the Obamacare rules. It wouldn't change those rules, but it would allow insurance companies to ignore the Obamacare rules for plans for individuals or small businesses. That's the type of plan I'm on, for example. It would allow them to bail on covering maternity. They could bail on covering mental health treatment in all but one of their plans. The rule would be you have to have one plan that covers those things. It can cost whatever it is they want to charge. Forget about Democrats. Even Republicans don't like that amendment, so that one is unlikely to pass. We've got the Portman Amendment. Senator Rob Portman actually has to think about all the people in his state of Ohio that benefited from the Medicaid expansion. So his idea is for people who are currently on Medicaid tax credits, for people who are currently on Medicaid, we will create a $100 billion fund to give them tax credits so that they can buy their own insurance if they switch out of Medicaid. Then you've got a straight repeal-only bill. Senator Rand Paul likes that one. We were listening to him earlier, Pat, on the floor of the Senate, talking about that repeal period. He's been against many of the proposed substitutes to Obamacare because he believes it still contains a lot of parts of Obamacare. He wants to go with the whole thing. And then most recently, we've heard about this skinny repeal. That's a new popular phrase, and it's not the latest. It's not going to be the result of the latest weight loss plan or diet. What that means is you get rid of 3 Obamacare provisions. You get rid of the individual mandate, you get rid of the employer insurance mandate, and you get rid of the tax on medical device manufacturers. The problem is, if you get rid of that and keep other stuff, you can no longer pay for the other stuff. In other words, these are some of the provisions that enable those other things to be funded.
Right. I mean, hearing all these different proposals, it just sounds as if Senate Republicans are trying to pass something, anything,
they're
because
desperate.
then you can move it to the next step, which is conference, and you can join it together in some way with the version the House passed, which is the American Health Care Act that we all thought was dead.
Yeah.
And what this also allows them to do is to go home to their constituents during the August recess
Say
we moved to start debate on Affordable Care Act.
We did something, right? We did something, and they can't go back and I have to explain, wait a second, Trump said on day one he was going to start working on this, and you've done nothing. The real situation here is these people are never going to solve the healthcare problem. We would only have new problems created by the, quote, solutions that have been proposed so far. We will track it. We're covering this closely. It will affect, could potentially kick 10% of the country's population off of health insurance. In some truly blockbuster bipartisanship, Republican and Democratic senators were caught on a hot mic trashing Donald Trump, including saying that he's crazy and a whole bunch of other stuff. It's rare that we see bipartisanship in Washington, D.C. And here we had Republican Senator Susan Collins from Maine and Democratic Senator from Rhode Island, Jack Reed, talking about how clueless Donald Trump is when it comes to actually governing. And after they exchange a few statements, Jack Reed says, and this is where we're going to pick up the audio from the Washington Post, Jack Reed says he believes Trump is crazy. It's a little hard to hear it at the beginning of the audio I'm about to play. And then Republican Senator Susan Collins responds, she's worried about Donald Trump as a result of his perceived, quote, craziness. Again, the audio is from the Washington Post. It's kind of difficult to hear at the beginning, but the first line is Jack Reed saying about Trump, I think he's crazy. Let's take a listen.
This is crazy. I mean, I don't say that lightly and as a kind of, a goofy guy. And, this thing, if we don't get a budget deal,
I know.
we're going to be paralyzed. DOD is going to be paralyzed. Everybody's going to be paralyzed.
I know.
And he hasn't said one word.
Nothing. I don't even think he knows that there is a BC.
Yeah.
Also controversially, but less relevant for us, I'll mention it so people don't think I'm deliberately ignoring it. Collins later in the recording talks about Congressman Blake Farenthold, a fellow Republican, and she talks about how he's huge and so unattractive, okay? And we're not even going to dig into that, but she did mention that. The real scandal here is how dare Republican Susan Collins speak so politely to a Democrat. I'm kidding. But what does this tell us? This tells us that as much as I disagree with Republicans, even Republicans like Susan Collins, who's more moderate on many issues, they aren't all morons. And at least some of them do see what's going on here. They see the scope and the nature of what is going on with Donald Trump, that we've got a totally unhinged, unbalanced president in charge. I wish Republicans were willing to talk this way publicly. You know what I mean, Pat? Because then we would actually see, hey, you know what? Even Republicans in the House and Senate realize how bonkers this guy is.
And it's not as if these senators are saying this in front of a campaign rally or anything else. It's not like it's a public statement where you're trying to get sound bites out of it.
Definitely.
They thought this was a private conversation, and this shows that this is how they really feel about the president.
That's right. It shows that in private, Republicans probably lack any confidence whatsoever in Trump, which is maybe a good thing. If they've already lost confidence, if Donald Trump's approval rating continues to trickle down, these Republicans are way more likely to publicly bail on Trump than we might have otherwise assumed. People wanted change, right? And they got change, but it's a type of change that no one seems to really have much confidence in. I mean, Democrats obviously have no confidence in Trump. We're learning that at least Some Republicans have no confidence in Trump. Many in Trump's own staff lack confidence in Trump, given the constant stream of leaks from his own staff, as well as the resignations. Just a side note, I looked up how Fox News was reporting about this leaked audio, and when I looked at it, it omitted everything about Trump that Collins and Reid said. It was only reporting on Collins's comments about Congressman Farenthold being overweight and ugly. I don't know if that's been updated since, but you got a completely sanitized version of the truth on Fox News.
I thought it was perfectly fine for Collins to say what she said, especially because Farenthold said that if she was a man, he would challenge her to a duel. Which is,
that was weird.
A chauvinistic remark, I guess you'd say. Aaron Burr style, even.
It was very strange. Everything about it was weird, and I just don't even feel like this Farenthold guy deserves our attention. That's more my thing. But yeah, colorful comments nonetheless. Discuss this with us on our Reddit discussion forum at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. We will take a break. William Gairdner joins me next. I predict a very interesting interview.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined on the program today by William Gairdner, who's a former Olympian and author of The Great Divide, Why Liberals and Conservatives Will Never, Ever Agree, which may well be true. William, first set up for us why you chose to write a book on this topic.
Well, I got tired of going to social gatherings or to a dinner party, and whenever an interesting topic was raised, there was either silence or outrage. And I thought something's wrong in the West, certainly in our country, Canada, and I think you probably have the same experience down there. When I was a young man, if you were about, say, 20 years old at such a gathering, you were expected to have opinions, and you would be chastised if they were stupid opinions or poorly argued. But I can't remember anyone ever expressing outrage of the kind that we hear so often today. And to me, this indicated a world that was kind of going silent on the major issues of life, philosophically, morally, politically. People segregating off into different attitude groups, not really discussing things with each other, and frightened of debate and frightened to get called out on their own arguments. So I thought someone's got to write a book that gets at the substructure here. So if you'll permit me, I'll just say what the purpose was. I imagine a man standing out on the street on a beautiful day, beautiful buildings all around him, and suddenly there's a huge gash in the street, and the buildings start to shake, and there's rubble and bricks falling all over the place, and the first thing he says is, "Oh my gosh, it's an earthquake." But of course, it's not an earthquake. The earthquake is way down below the ground in the geological forces that are crashing and grinding away, and he can't see those. What he sees is the rubble or the consequences of the earthquake. So I thought we need a book which gets at the ideological forces that are grinding away beneath the political rubble at the surface in our democracies. So a seismologist, for example, can see the geological forces, but ordinary people can't. And in this book, I try to reveal the ideological forces. It's not about party politics or anything like that. It's about political and moral philosophy and the arguments people on the liberal and conservative side tend to have over these issues.
Okay, so let's dig into some of what you said there. You mentioned sort of earlier on in your overview of the book that you have noticed some of the outrage that some now have when it comes to political ideology, opinions, positions on policy, etc. And you said that is a negative thing. Is it possible, though, that one might be outraged more now than previously because the positions being taken by some on political issues are more outrageous? I mean, is that a possibility that you're open to?
Look, it's a possibility, but I think of that sort of comment, with all due respect, as a kind of popular conceit. And we tend to think that, nothing has been as outrageous as the things we're experiencing today. I think the Romans were just as outraged as we get at all sorts of things in their time. So it's a bit of a conceit to think that something's worse or better today than it was in the past. But I can't tell you how many public speeches I've given where somebody will stand up after the speech and say, "Mr. Gairdner, I'm outraged by what you've been saying." And I look them right in the eye and I say, "Well, you couldn't be more outraged than I am. Now, what's your point?"
Yeah, no, I understand that. But I guess my question is, you've indicated that the presence of outrage is indicative of either ignorance or lack of openness to other ideas or whatever the case may be. But outrage is not an invalid human emotion. Outrage is not an invalid reaction to what one might be doing. I'm in looking at the book and in hearing you talk, it concerns me a little bit that we're dismissing outrage out of hand in a sense.
Well, as I said, I think that's a bit of a conceit. In fact, outrage can be a cover-up and a way of escaping the depth and the logic of someone else's argument.
Yeah, it can be, but just saying, you know, I think saying that that's a conceited opinion, that's not really an argument, is it?
I didn't say conceited, I said a conceit. It's a little different. But leave that behind for the moment. I'm simply saying that I think people go to what some philosophers call and psychologists call emotivism as a kind of escape from challenge. And I think that's what we're seeing all around us. We're seeing either silence. In other words, we just don't raise certain topics at the dinner table or at a social gathering because we are, in fact, frightened of outrage, and people are using emotion to scare you.
Well, I think the point of agreement we could probably have in the interest of finding common ground and then figuring out where our differences are is I do think that a response such as "I'm offended by what you're saying, full stop," that is also not an argument and not productive. And I think you'd probably agree with me there. When we talk about particular issues, are there any particular issues, and you write about a lot of them in the book, that you believe are particularly intractable in modern society, or are the more likely issues to get us at an impasse when there are political disagreements?
Well, look, I think it's important for your listeners to understand what the Great Divide is about. It's really about self-discovery. It's helping readers to articulate their ideas instead of their emotions or their outrage. So at the end of each chapter, and I have to say in the interest of flagrant self-promotion, that this is the first book that I have ever read or seen, and I've seen an awful lot of them in my time, in which you get an actual clear delineation of the two sides in a kind of table form at the end of each chapter. You've probably seen those. There's about 14 of them in the book, and I think the subtitle of the book, which is Why Liberals and Conservatives Will Never, Ever Agree, should have been instead something like this: Find out how liberal or conservative you really are. And that's the reaction I get from readers all the time. They go to the tables and they say, "Oh my goodness, you know, I didn't realize I was as liberal as I am, or that I'm so conservative, and your tables helped me to clarify the kind of person that I really am in terms of my political and moral philosophy." So to me, that was a huge contribution, and I encourage your listeners to go get the book.
Yeah, I mean, well, I saw those tables, and the table, I can't speak to whether the format of tabling some of these ideas is a unique one or one that's been tried before. But the concern I had, and I know that you will address this in a very specific way, is that in the book, you do sort of set yourself up as an arbiter between left and right, or at least someone who can tell us this is what it would mean to be conservative on this issue and what it would mean to be liberal. But you do have skin in the game, right? I mean, I've been reviewing your recent tweets on your Twitter account over the last couple of months, and you have a significant a bias on a lot of these issues. And I'm wondering if you were concerned in setting up these tables and parameters, what care you took to try to prevent your personal biases from impacting your views in the book.
Well, David, I encourage you to read the introduction to the book where I do discuss this.
Yeah.
And I say that I began as a young kind of socialist leftist, like a lot of people. You know the old saying, if you're not a socialist by the time you're 20, you haven't got a heart. If you're still a socialist by the time you're 40, you don't have any brains.
Yeah, I think it's a terrible statement. I think it's totally bogus, but I have heard it.
Well, we can debate that another time. So anyway, the winds of experience and my reading and thinking blew me over to the right side of the divide. But in the introduction, I make it clear that I'm trying to illustrate both sides of the equation here as fairly as I can. And I think a lot of people who read the book have said to me, you did a pretty good job of it. However, to take your point, no one can do a perfect job. I say in the introduction, it's like playing chess against yourself. Someone has to win the game. And you know that when you're playing, if you've ever played chess against yourself, how that flips back and forth. Should I make this move or not? So it was difficult. And I don't hide the fact from anybody that I'm what I call a true conservative thinker. In fact, people ask me, what's it been like writing and thinking about these kinds of things for the last 35 years of your life? And I say, you know what? I feel like I've been a man standing on the rock in the middle of a leftward drifting sea. And in the distance, I can see ships through the fog and they're drifting to the left and I hear voices. You know what they're saying? They're saying, look, there's a man out there drifting to the right. That's the situation in Canada, certainly. When I started, a lot of the things that I wrote about, I was chastised for by the left, who called me extremist. Gay marriage? There's never going to be such a thing. You're such an extremist saying something like that. I said, no, you wait and see. So here it is. And I just feel like I said, I haven't changed my position. I'm a kind of Burkean in social and moral philosophy. I'm a libertarian in economic philosophy, and so on. And I'm arguing pretty much the same positions I began with 35 years ago.
All right, well, let's pause exactly on that point with William Gairdner, who is the author of The Great Divide, Why Liberals and Conservatives Will Never, Ever Agree. And tomorrow we will pick up this conversation, talking more specifically about some of the issues that William just mentioned and also discusses in the book.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Donald Trump showed up at a Boy Scout rally called the National Scout Jamboree and went so crazy that the Boy Scouts of America are now distancing themselves from the bizarre political nature of Trump's speech the other day. If you know anything about the Boy Scouts of America, the last president you'd think they distanced themselves from would be Donald Trump, but that's exactly what's going on. Trump showed up to talk to the Boy Scouts, talked about fake news, went on a tirade against Obamacare, went on a tirade against Barack Obama, talked about the fake media, talked about the cesspool or sewer of politicians in Washington, D.C. These are kids, mostly. These are children that Donald Trump is talking to. Then he went on to brag about his electoral college victory and the popular vote. He said, and you know, we have a tremendous disadvantage in the electoral vote. The popular vote is much easier. At another point, he noted, quote, and by the way, under the Trump administration, you'll be saying Merry Christmas again when you go shopping. Believe me, Merry Christmas. Here is a little bit of Donald Trump at this event.
You want to achieve your dreams, I said. Who the hell wants to speak about politics when I'm in front of the Boy Scouts, right? As the Scout law says, a Scout is trustworthy, loyal. We could use some more loyalty, I will tell you that. Did President Obama ever come to a jamboree?
Ooh.
Do you remember that incredible night with the maps? And the Republicans are red, and the Democrats are blue. And that map was so red, it was unbelievable.
Truly seemed like he was having a medical incident of some kind. It was just out there behavior. And to put a really fine point on it, I thought it would be funny to compare what Dwight D. Eisenhower said at the third National Boy Scout Jamboree back in 1953, and then compare it to what Donald Trump said. So here's Ike, okay, where he said, quote, to the Boy Scouts, I am confident that in meeting and talking with your fellow Scouts, you will gain a renewed awareness of the need for cooperating, working together in our country and in the world. Bonds of common purpose and common ideals can unite people, even when they come from the most distant and diverse places. This is an important lesson. And even if you learn no other, you will leave Irvine Ranch with a new wisdom. Quite poetic, quite inspirational.
I like Ike.
Quite a nice little speech from Ike. And now, here is some of what Donald Trump said to the Boy Scouts in 2017. Hey, what am I going to do? He sounds like a nice person. I do love you. By the way, just a question. Did President Obama ever come to a jamboree? And we'll be back. We'll be back. The answer is no. But we'll be back. In life, in order to be successful, and you people are well on the road to success, you have to find out what makes you excited, what makes you want to get up each morning and go to work. You have to find it. If you love what you do and dedicate yourself to your work, then you will gain momentum. And look, you have to. You need the word momentum. You will gain that momentum, and each success will create another success. The word momentum. I'll tell you a story that's very interesting for me. When I was young, there was a man named William Levitt. You have some here. You have some in different states. Anybody hear of Levittown? And he was a very successful man, became unbelievable. He was a home builder, became an unbelievable success, and got more and more successful. And he'd build homes, and at night, he'd go to these major sites with teams of people, and he'd scour the sites for nails and sawdust and small pieces of wood, and they cleaned the site. So when the workers came in the next morning, the sites would be spotless and clean, and he did it properly. And he did this for 20 years. And then he was offered a lot of money for his company, and he sold his company for a tremendous amount of money, at the time especially. This is a long time ago. Sold his company for a tremendous amount of money. And he went out and bought a big yacht, and he had a very interesting life. I won't go any more than that because you're Boy Scouts, so I'm not going to tell you what he did. A different type of poetry, I guess we would say, from Trump to the Boy Scouts.
I mean, there are times where you have to act as if you're the president of everyone. And in front of the Boy Scouts, it's so easy to do. You can just talk about service and patriotism and fraternity and all that stuff. Yeah, it's a gimme. You can't just always act as if you're the leader of a political party. And, you know, maybe go off of a teleprompter every now and then.
Well, endless parents, and there was one there, interestingly enough, but he seemed to be going off teleprompter, if you know what I mean. Endless parents of Boy Scouts spoke out saying it was outrageous. Boy Scouts immediately distancing themselves from this abortive speech. They put out a statement saying, "The Boy Scouts of America is wholly nonpartisan and does not promote any one position, product, service, political candidate, or philosophy," which is not true. I mean, it's officially true, but the Boy Scouts is known by and large as an organization that is much more sensitive to conservative ideas, and they've had issues with homophobia and so on and so forth. So what they're saying is true, but it's not even really true. The letter of it may be true, the spirit isn't, and they still put this out. Interesting little tidbit for you, Pat. President Obama, George W. Bush, and Bill Clinton all were Boy Scouts. Donald Trump was not.
And Obama did go to the Jamboree. He did so in 2010. I'm surprised Donald Trump didn't fact-check himself before he said that in front of 30,000 people.
Yeah, really hard to believe. Donald Trump, in the midst of a failed first 6 months in the White House and endless scandals and investigations, and in the midst of considering whether he can pardon himself and his family from crimes they might have committed, took to Twitter this morning to announce that transgender people will no longer be allowed in the military. Maybe a play to his base, maybe an attempt to distract. He announced this in a 3-tweet series where he said, quote, "After consultation with my generals and military experts, please be advised that the United States government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military. Our military must be focused on decisive and overwhelming victory and cannot be burdened with the tremendous medical costs and disruption that transgender in the military would entail. Thank you." How does a transgender person in the military prevent decisive victories, I wonder? Nicely timed little distraction from the bills in the House and Senate that might lead to 10% of the country's population losing their health insurance. How does this make any sense, right? I mean, Trump talked during the campaign about how he would be a friend to the LGBT community. And it's strange to remember that back in 1999, Trump was at the forefront of arguing that gay Americans should be allowed to serve. I wonder if it's a play to distract. The Obama administration had decided last year to allow trans people to serve openly in the military. Last month, Defense Secretary James Mattis agreed to delay the recruitment of transgender people by 6 months. And this is really not a big deal in the sense that Trump's making it out to be. The independent Rand Corporation did a big study into transgender members of the military. It estimates that there's 2,450 transgender individuals in the military out of 1.2 million active duty service members. That's 0.2%. The national average of transgender individuals is estimated at 0.6%. And it sort of makes sense, right? There's certainly some self-selection bias The military is not looked at as a particularly friendly place to transgender individuals, so it would make sense that the trans population in the military would be lower than the trans population of the United States at large. But how are you going to do this, right? How do you enforce it? Because once somebody has a biological sex, and once they have a gender identity, and they're in the military, unless someone is requesting military medical coverage for transitioning, how are you going to figure out who's transgender? Are you going to start doing a genitalia check? Like, how are you going to go and figure out, okay, here's our 2,450 transgender service members. Now we're kicking them out. I don't get how you even do it, aside from the fact that it makes no sense.
They probably don't know themselves, and I think that's the whole point here, because this isn't really about saving money or national security. It's all about playing to his base, and I think we see that by the fact that he laid that out in tweets.
Is anyone else sort of tired of national policy being announced by Twitter? I'm kind of getting a little tired of it. I don't know about you. And the real question with regard to the trans community in the military is, if you're qualified to serve, shouldn't you just be allowed to serve? Trump should really look at Israel, actually, where there are openly transgender soldiers. Everything is fine. There have been high-ranking gay and lesbian members of the Israeli military for a very long time. It's been no big deal. And this is some combination of bad policy to appeal to the most extreme of the Trump base while distracting from the constant and endless scandals that Trump finds himself wrapped up in. And I don't know, there were questions this morning about whether the Pentagon even knew this was coming.
He said he talked to his generals, but
he said
he consulted.
Apparently he consulted with James Mattis.
Okay.
That doesn't tell us, like, did James Mattis suggest that this was a good idea? What does it mean to consult with? And a few generals were actually, retired generals were asked about this. They said, consulting with is a very vague term. We don't really know what that means. There's sort of an implication that the generals agree with this, but we don't even really know that.
The whole profession of consulting is very vague in and of itself.
Well, that's another story. We've got a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. There's at least one viewer who is really not buying some of Pat's recent coffee-related assertions. Take a listen to this.
Hey, David. I'm just calling in to address some recent scandals that Pat has been involved in.
Yeah.
He claims to only drink 1 to 2 cups of coffee every week, but I just can't see how someone who owns a Keurig, a hefty investment, mind you, only drinks 1 to 2 cups of coffee a week. Honestly, this is heavily contested in my friends, my friend circles, I should say. I really want Pat to address why he spent such a hefty amount of money on a Keurig if he only drinks 1 to 2 cups of coffee a week. Thank you very much.
Okay.
David, love the show.
Yeah, so part of the confusion here is Pat drinks 1 or 2 cups of coffee per day, and on a previous episode, I misstated it and said 1 or 2 cups of coffee per week, which I think has caused some of the confusion. But generally, the question is that a Keurig is expensive, and if you have an expensive Keurig, you would really only have that if you're drinking a lot of coffee. First of all, is a Keurig expensive? I have no idea what they cost.
I think they can range in price, but you'll get one for under $100, so it's not
They're
that
under
much.
$100.
And I have to mention this too. I have moved on to cold brew coffee in the wake of the scandal.
Okay. And what device are you using for that?
I don't even know. It was a gift, just like the Keurig was. I shouldn't have to face any responsibility for this. And if anything, I think that we should fire this voicemail caller for leading the investigation against me.
No, but seriously, what kind of cold brew device are you using?
I really don't know.
You don't know what it is.
It was a gift.
How does it work generally?
You put like 14 tablespoons of coffee into this central component, which is a lot of coffee.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And then you fill up the rest of the pitcher with water, leave it in the fridge overnight, and just kind of like how you enter a tea bag into a cup of hot water.
Sure.
Eventually, it will seep out, and you'll have coffee by the morning.
Anyway, listen, I think it's time to move on from. I'm ready to declare the coffee scandal dead. It's like, okay, you said you were having 1 cup. We figured out it was 3.5 cups. It's like, yeah, fine. You had no idea how much coffee you were having, but
I
we moved on.
declared it dead months ago.
I think it's over. On the bonus show today, we will be doing discussion and blowback as a result of the Dave Rubin full show interview. Microsoft is killing MS Paint, and 2,500 products have suffered shrinkflation. I've talked about shrinkflation before, and we will talk about it again on today's bonus show. davidpakman.com/membership. Sign up for the bonus show, get instant access, and we will talk to you there.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.